The physician's fingers were unsteady. I observed her gaze fixed upon my chart, not the sonogram display where my infant's cardiac rhythm pulsated in monochrome. No, her attention was locked onto the documentation, onto my spouse's designation printed in precise characters at the document's summit. Then she deactivated the monitor, simply terminated it mid-procedure, like someone had severed the cord to my entire existence. "Mrs. Donovan," she uttered, and her tone was scarcely a murmur. "I require a private conversation with you immediately." She guided me to her consultation room, secured the entrance, engaged the lock. I believed something was amiss with the unborn child. My pulse was thundering so intensely I could perceive it in my ears. I couldn't draw breath. I couldn't formulate thoughts. Then she articulated phrases that caused my universe to crumble. "You must abandon your husband today before you return home. Retain a divorce attorney first." I chuckled, actually laughed. Out loud. Well, why? We're anticipating a baby. Collectively, we're content. That's precisely the issue. Her complexion was pallid as parchment. "What I'm about to reveal will transform everything you believe you understand about your union. But permit me to commence from the origin because you need to comprehend how I wound up in that office 4 months pregnant. Discovering my complete existence was constructed on falsehoods told by the man resting beside me each evening. My designation is Daphne Holloway. I'm 32 years old. I function as a marketing director at a specialized agency in Connecticut, and I originate from what individuals politely term established. My grandmother Eleanor departed 5 years ago and bequeathed me her holdings, approximately $2.3 million in a fund, plus the historic Holloway family residence where 5 generations of women had dwelt, adored, and raised their offspring. I never paraded it. I labored diligently at my own profession. I operated a 10-year-old Subaru and acquired my coffee from the same establishment every morning. The inheritance was protection, not character, but it rendered me a mark. I simply didn't recognize it yet. I encountered Grant Donovan 4 years ago at my family's yearly charity gala. The Holloways had sponsored it for generations. That year, I was positioned at the beverage station, attempting to evade a discussion with an individual who'd inquired about my monetary circumstances within 3 minutes of encountering me, understated. Correct? Then Grant materialized. Elevated, dark hair, effortless grin. He questioned what I was consuming, made a jest about the dreadful jazz ensemble, didn't reference finances once. He asserted to be merely a financial consultant who'd obtained a spontaneous invitation from an associate. He stated he had zero awareness of who the Holloway family was. Reflecting back, that ought to have been my initial warning indicator. A financial consultant who doesn't investigate the hosting family of a significant charity occasion, that's comparable to a culinary expert appearing at a cooking competition declaring, "Oh, we're preparing food today." Had no clue, but I was exhausted by obvious fortune seekers. And here was this appealing man inquiring about my preferred literature instead of my financial balances. We courted for a year. Grant was attentive, considerate, remembered the minute particulars. He persisted on covering dinner expenses, even though I could have purchased the entire establishment. He appeared so authentic. My mother, Vivian, perceived through him immediately. Following their initial encounter, she drew me aside. "That man's smile doesn't reach his eyes." She said, "Something's wrong with him, Daphne. I can sense it." I informed her she was being irrational, overly protective, envious even. We argued about Grant continuously. Eventually, we simply ceased communicating. 2 years of near quiet between me and the woman who raised me, birthday messages, and nothing more. All because I selected to trust my spouse over my own mother. Surprise revelation. Mother was correct. And she's been waiting patiently to utter, "I warned you." At this point, she's completely earned it. Grant and I wedded after a year of dating. Lovely ceremony at my grandmother's property. He wept during his vows, tears flowing down his face as he vowed to cherish and safeguard me eternally. Reflecting back, those were probably the most genuine tears he ever shed. Not from joy, from relief. His extended scheme was ultimately succeeding. After 2 years of attempting for a child, naturally, we consulted a fertility expert. The assessment struck like a vehicle. Grant had severe male factor infertility. His sperm count was nearly non-existent, and what little he possessed barely moved. Natural conception was essentially unattainable. Grant appeared crushed. He wept in the automobile for 20 minutes. He apologized repeatedly, like it was his individual failing. I comforted him. I assured him we'd determine it out collectively. That's what marriage represented. What I didn't realize was that Grant wasn't weeping from sorrow. He was weeping because his strategy had just become substantially more intricate. All that feeling was him recalculating, not grieving. We decided on IVF with a specialized procedure called ICSI, where physicians inject a solitary sperm directly into an egg. Our optimal opportunity. Grant insisted on researching facilities himself. Located one he stated was ideal. Managed all the paperwork. At the time, I believed he was being encouraging because I was so emotionally depleted. The initial cycle failed. Devastating. I couldn't arise from bed for 3 days. Grant embraced me, murmured encouragement, guaranteed we'd attempt again. The second cycle, 7 months ago, succeeded. Positive pregnancy assessment. 2 pink lines that transformed everything. I sobbed happy tears. Grant clutched me tightly, already discussing nursery colors and infant names, and the future he'd constantly envisioned. Then casually, he referenced, "I should revise my will now that we're a family." He said, I believed it was endearing, practical, the sort of thing an admirable spouse contemplates. I had zero clue he was already counting my grandmother's wealth as his own. Everything appeared flawless. The devoted husband, the baby forthcoming, the existence I've fantasized about since I was a tiny girl playing with dolls in my grandmother's garden. I had no notion that in merely 3 months a stranger with unsteady hands would exhibit documents that would incinerate my ideal life to remnants, and I had no notion that the blaze had been ignited by the man resting beside me each solitary nightly. Before we proceed, if you're relishing this narrative, please hit subscribe and inform me in the remarks where you're viewing from and what hour it is there. I peruse every single remark, and it genuinely signifies the world to me. Now, back to the account. 4 months pregnant and something had moved in my marriage. Minor things initially, the kind of things you observe but rationalize away because the alternative is too agonizing to contemplate. Grant started keeping his mobile device face down on every surface. Fresh code. I didn't know he'd step outside to accept calls, return saying it was employment matters, and altered the topic before I could pose inquiries. He asserted he was restructuring client portfolios during these late-night conversations at 11 p.m. on a Saturday. Now, I'm no finance specialist, but I'm fairly certain the stock exchange takes weekends off. Unless Grant had clandestine clients in Tokyo, which he definitely did not. Something else was happening. The late evenings at the workplace multiplied 3 times weekly, sometimes 4. He wouldn't come home until midnight. He's a financial consultant, not an emergency room surgeon. What could possibly necessitate that kind of timetable? I discovered Receipt, a dining establishment downtown I'd never visited, $280 for dinner to a hotel in the city 40 minutes from our residence. Why would my spouse require a hotel chamber so near to home? When I questioned, Grant had responses for everything. Polished, rehearsed responses that arrived just a touch too swiftly. Client dinner, significant networking. The hotel was for a conference that extended late, and it simply made more sense to remain over than drive home fatigued. And when I pressed harder, when I posed additional questions, his tone shifted. Daphne, you're being irrational. It's the hormones. My mother cautioned me about this. Women become illogical during pregnancy. Don't develop into one of those wives. I felt embarrassed for even asking. That's how skilled he was at this. He made me apologize for doubting him. The monetary strain strengthened around the same period. Grant's requests about funds became more recurrent, more pressing, more inventive. We should include me in your trust. What if something occurs during childbirth? I need to be able to obtain funds for the infant. It's merely pragmatic. Power of attorney is common sense. Every married couple does it. Unless you don't have faith in me, your grandmother's dwelling is too spacious for us anyway. We should dispose of it, invest the funds properly. I know precisely which funds would optimize our returns. The man desired me to sell my grandmother's residence and permit him to invest the earnings. This is the identical man who insisted we required 3 different streaming services because he couldn't recall which one contained his programs. That's who I should entrust with $2 million. Absolutely not. When I declined gently and cautiously, Grant's warmth dissipated. He became cold, remote. He started resting on the far edge of the bed, alleging I moved excessively now that I was pregnant. The disputes became more regular. He'd bring up the trust I'd refuse. He'd give me treatment for days. His silent treatments lasted exactly until he became hungry. Amusing how that operated. Apparently, his principles had a time restriction, and that restriction was an unfilled stomach. He barely contacted me anymore. Blamed my transforming physique. Said he didn't wish to damage the infant. Sounded caring on the surface. It felt like rejection deep within. I attempted to discuss it with him. He said I was being needy, hormonal, troublesome. I started to question if the issue was me. One night, I awoke at 2 o'clock in the morning and Grant wasn't in bed. I discovered him in the kitchen, bent over his phone, speaking in a muted tone. I stood in the corridor and listened. It's nearly time, he was saying. By spring, everything will be resolved. You just need to wait until he observed me and ended the call immediately. Work crisis? He said. Return to sleep, darling. I didn't inquire who has work crises at 2 a.m. about matters being settled by spring. I was too fatigued, too pregnant, too desperate to believe my marriage remained acceptable. My closest companion, Sarah, came over for lunch the subsequent week. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and observed me formulate excuse after excuse for Grant. His tension, his job pressure, his adjustment to becoming a parent. Finally, she set down her utensil and gazed at me with those eyes that had recognized me since university deaf. Listen to yourself. When's the last occasion you spoke to your mother? I didn't respond. When's the last occasion Grant was genuinely delighted to see you not performing happiness, not putting on a display for others, really genuinely delighted to see you enter through the doorway? I couldn't respond to that either. Have faith in your instinct, Sarah said. Something is wrong here. I informed her she was being melodramatic, but that night I couldn't sleep. I kept contemplating Grant's phone, always face down, his late nights, his abrupt obsession with obtaining entry to my funds, the manner he regarded me sometimes when he believed I wasn't paying attention, like I was an arithmetic problem to solve, not a person to cherish. 4 months pregnant, routine OB appointment for an ultrasound. My customary physician was on leave, so I was scheduled with a colleague instead, Dr. Elizabeth Reeves. I went alone. Grant had a client conference he absolutely couldn't miss. Standard appointment, nothing exceptional. I reclined on the examination table, chilled gel on my abdomen, waiting to observe my infant moving on the display like always. Dr. Reeves was pleasant and professional. She engaged in small talk while configuring the equipment, inquired how I was feeling, if the infant was moving significantly, all the typical questions. Then she accessed my file, glanced at the paperwork. Her expression shifted. She looked at my spouse's name, looked at me, back at the name. I observed her hands commenced a quiver. She placed down the ultrasound instrument, reached over, and deactivated the monitor completely. "Mrs. Donovan," she uttered, and her tone was scarcely above a murmur. "I need to speak with you privately immediately. I believed something was wrong with the infant. Every worst-case scenario inundated my consciousness in 3 seconds flat." She guided me to her office, secured the entrance, locked it behind us, and then she articulated phrases that fractured my entire universe wide open. "I know what your husband did, and I possess evidence." She extracted a folder from her desk drawer. Her hands were still shaking as she opened it. "My younger sibling works at your fertility clinic," she said. 3 weeks ago, she came to me weeping. She disclosed everything to me. When I observed your husband's name on your file just now, I recognized it immediately." Dr. Reeves inhaled deeply. "Mrs. Donovan, I'm deeply sorry, but you need to observe this before you go home, before he realizes that you understand." She positioned the folder open on her desk between us and everything I believed I understood about my marriage, my pregnancy, and the man I loved converted to ash directly before my eyes. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves' younger sibling, Emily, functioned as a nurse at the fertility clinic, the identical clinic my husband had so meticulously investigated for our IVF procedure. The clinic he insisted was ideal for us. Now I comprehended why he'd been so particular about that selection. Elizabeth explained everything, her voice steady even though her hands weren't. 3 weeks earlier, Emily had appeared at Elizabeth's apartment close to midnight. She was sobbing so intensely she could barely articulate. She hadn't been sleeping. She'd lost mass. The guilt had been consuming her alive for months, and she finally couldn't bear it any longer. 7 months ago, Emily informed her a patient's spouse had approached her at the clinic. He was charming, well-attired, seemed desperate, but rational. He stated he had a special circumstance that required discretion. His wife didn't know, he clarified, but he was utilizing donor sperm for their IVF cycle. Some family hereditary issue he didn't wish to burden her with. Nothing malevolent, He simply required assistance, maintaining confidentiality. He'd compensate well for the assistance. $30,000 for a nurse, earning $52,000 annually, drowning in educational loans and credit card debt. It was unfeasible to decline. Emily assisted exchange the specimens. Grant's sperm, which couldn't have generated a pregnancy anyway, was substituted with sperm from a compensated donor. The embryologist was complicit too. Grant had approached him individually with another payment. Between the two of them, the exchange went undetected. The embryologist advised Emily not to fret. The husband understands what he's doing. It's not our concern what arrangements married couples make. But it plagued Emily, especially when she observed in the clinic records that the pregnancy was successful. Somewhere out there existed a woman carrying an infant she believed was her husband's child. And it wasn't the guilt destroyed her. She couldn't face herself in the mirror. She telephoned in sick constantly. She started experiencing panic episodes at work. 3 weeks ago, she finally fractured. She disclosed everything to Elizabeth. I sat in that office listening to Dr. Reeves explain how my husband had expended $50,000 to structure evidence against me for infidelity. $50,000. That's more than he spent on our entire wedding, including the honeymoon. I suppose I finally understood where his genuine priorities had always resided. And they definitely weren't the open bar, but there was more, significantly more. Elizabeth presented the complete scheme. The strategy Grant had been constructing piece by piece for over a year. Phase 1 was already finished. Bribe the clinic personnel, exchange the sperm specimens, ensure everyone remained silent. Phase 2 was also finished. Await a successful pregnancy. Perform the devoted, enthusiastic father-to-be. Construct the flawless image. Phase 3 was planned for after the infant was delivered. Grant was going to have the embryologist modify the clinic records. The documentation would be altered to indicate that our second IVF cycle failed. That way, it would appear we had conceived naturally afterward. Phase 4 was the snare. After the birth, Grant intended to propose a DNA test. He'd frame it as something sweet and sentimental, evidence of fatherhood to display in the nursery, a commemoration of our family. And Phase 5 was the fatal strike, when the DNA test established he wasn't the biological father, and when the medical records indicated we had conceived naturally, he would possess all the proof he needed. His wife had been unfaithful. The infant wasn't his. He was the casualty. Our prenuptial had an infidelity provision. This is common in affluent families. Safeguards the asset. If one spouse cheats, they owe the other spouse $500,000 in penalties. Plus, the cheating spouse forfeits any entitlement to the other's property. Plus, the wronged spouse can pursue additional emotional damages. Grant's ultimate objective was transparent. He would depart with $500,000 minimum. He'd ruin my reputation. He'd probably obtain more in a lawsuit. And I would have been so devastated, so bewildered, so desperate to shield my child that I wouldn't have contested effectively. He was depending on my humiliation to make me compliant. He nearly succeeded. Dr. Reeves extracted more documents from the folder. Emily had preserved everything, original specimen records showing the exchange, the donor's identification number, payment records that could be traced to accounts Grant managed. There were even email communications between Grant and the embryologist. They believed they were being clever, utilizing personal email accounts and ambiguous language. But there was enough, more than sufficient. Emily had also located the donor. His name was Marcus Webb, a 28-year-old graduate student who'd been compensated $15,000 in currency. Normal sperm donation pays maybe $100. Occasionally, 200, 15,000 should have been a massive warning sign, but educational loans don't settle themselves. Marcus was informed it was a private arrangement for a couple who desired additional discretion. He had no notion he was part of a fraud. When he discovered, he was irate and willing to cooperate. There was one additional matter, Elizabeth stated carefully. Something her own investigation had revealed. Grant Donovan had $180,000 in gambling obligations. He'd been gambling for years. Online poker, sports wagering, casino excursions. He'd informed me were business conferences, all while pretending to be a responsible financial consultant with his existence perfectly integrated. And the funds for the bribes, the $50,000 he'd paid to corrupt my IVF and frame me for adultery. He'd embezzled it from his own clients, small sums over time, cautiously concealed in the bookkeeping. His company had no idea yet. Grant wasn't merely attempting to steal my inheritance. He was a drowning man, clutching at anything within grasp. His gambling obligations were overwhelming him. The individuals he owed funds to weren't patient bankers. They were the kind of people who don't file lawsuits when you don't pay. I was intended to be his lifeline. My grandmother's money was intended to rescue him, and he was willing to destroy me entirely to acquire it. I sat in that office for an extended period. The documents spread out before me, the truth searing a hole in my chest. Shock arrived first, cold, paralyzing shock, then disbelief. I kept examining the documents repeatedly, searching for some error, some misinterpretation that would restore everything to normal. Then the fragments started connecting. The late nights, the secret phone calls, his obsession with accessing my funds, his cautious, calculated attention when we were dating. He'd investigated me before we ever met. The charity gala where we accidentally collided into each other wasn't an accident at all. He knew precisely who I was and what I was valued before he ever greeted me. The way he wept at our wedding, those tears, I believed, came from joy. They were tears of relief. His extended deception was finally succeeding. And my mother Vivian, who I'd pushed away for 2 years, who I'd labeled paranoid and jealous and overprotective, she'd perceive through him in 5 minutes. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. She attempted to caution me. I selected him over her. I contemplated crying. I contemplated screaming. I contemplated driving home and confronting him, hurling those papers in his face, observing him scramble to explain. But then something else occurred. Something cold settled into my stomach. Something keen and concentrated and utterly composed. He believed I was unintelligent. He'd constructed this entire scheme on the assumption that I would collapse, that when his trap activated, I'd be so devastated by the evidence of my unfaithfulness that I'd surrender whatever he wanted merely to cease it. He believed I was feeble. He believed I was naive. He believed I was an easy prey. He had no notion who he'd wedded. I looked at Dr. Reeves. He doesn't realize that I know. No, my sister hasn't informed anyone else. And I only connected you to the case when I viewed your file today. Excellent. I gathered the documents meticulously. I require duplicates of everything. And I need you to connect me with Emily directly. What are you going to do? I stood up. My hand rested on my abdomen on the infant who was entirely blameless in all of this. A child who didn't select their biology, a child I already cherished, regardless of DNA tests or donor identities or any of the ugliness encircling their existence. My spouse believes he's been playing chess. I uttered. He believes he's 3 moves ahead. He believes he's already trained. I straightened my shoulders. He's about to discover I already flipped the board. I drove home from that appointment with my expression carefully neutral, hands steady on the wheel, respiration even, just in case. Grant had installed security cameras around our residence 2 years ago. At the time, he stated it was for protection. Now, I questioned if it was monitoring, if he observed the footage, if he was tracking my expressions, my movements, seeking any indication that I suspected something. So I presented him with nothing. He was waiting when I arrived home, standing in the kitchen with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. My mother's words resonated in my mind. 2 years too delayed. How was the appointment? He inquired. Is the infant okay? I smiled back, walked over and embraced him, exhibited him the ultrasound. Image Dr. Reeves had printed before everything changed. Perfect. I uttered, everything's absolutely perfect. I deserve an Academy Award for that performance. I smiled at him during dinner while mentally computing how much his bail would be. I questioned about his day while envisioning him in an orange prison garment. I even laughed at his joke about infant names. It wasn't amusing at all, but I committed to the role like my existence depended on it, because in a manner it did. I apologized for being irrational lately, blamed the hormones, utilized the exact same justification he'd thrown at me for months. His entire body relaxed when he heard it. The tension in his shoulders dissolved away. He believed he was still succeeding. He believed his plan was still on schedule. That night, he rested soundly beside me. I lay awake until 3 o'clock in the morning, gazing at the ceiling, arranging his destruction. The following morning, I telephoned in, unwell, to work. Then I drove 2 hours to a different city, checking my mirrors constantly to ensure I wasn't followed. Paranoid, perhaps, but I'd earned that paranoia. I located a private investigator named Patricia Morrison, EX police detective, 15 years on the force before transitioning to private practice, non-incensed attitude, penetrating eyes, the kind of woman who'd witnessed everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. I disclosed everything to her. She listened without interrupting, took notes, and when I finished, she smiled like a shark who'd just detected a bleeding swimmer. Your husband made numerous errors. She said, conceited men always do. Provide me 2 weeks. She obtained results in 10 days. Grant's gambling obligations totaled $180,000. He owed funds to online betting sites, underground poker games, and a few private lenders who definitely didn't submit paperwork with the IRS. The kind of creditors who become extremely inventive when payments are overdue. The embezzlement was verified. Approximately $53,000 missing from client accounts at his firm, siphoned over 18 months through small transactions designed to evade detection. His supervisors had no idea yet. And then there was the affair. 8 months. His assistant, hotel rooms, romantic dinners, weekend excursions disguised as business trips. Patricia had photographs, text messages, credit card receipts, the whole Pathetis collection. His assistant Naturally, it was his assistant. How utterly unoriginal. I was nearly insulted by the cliche. If you're going to demolish your marriage, at least demonstrate some imagination. Having an affair with your assistant is literally opening chapter of the Unfaithful Spouse manual. Not that such a manual exists, but if it did, Grant would have highlighted that page. Patricia discovered something else, too. This wasn't Grant's initial attempt at capturing a wealthy woman. 5 years ago, he dated someone in Boston, Caroline Ashford. Family wealth, trust fund, the complete package. They were together for 8 months before she discovered financial irregularities in a joint account he'd persuaded her to establish. She terminated things immediately, but was too humiliated to press charges. Patricia located her. Caroline was more than willing to furnish a statement now. She'd always regretted permitting him to depart unpunished. I met with Emily Brennan in secrecy, a coffee shop, an hour from town where nobody would recognize either of us. She appeared terrible. Thin, pale, dark circles beneath her eyes. The guilt had been consuming her alive. She started crying the moment she observed me sit down. "I'm deeply sorry," she kept uttering. I recognized it was incorrect. The funds, and he was so convincing, and I believed maybe he genuinely was just attempting to shield you from some genetic issue, and I halted her. "I require to know one thing. Are you willing to testify officially on the record?" She nodded without hesitation. "I'll inform them everything." I ought to have gone to the authorities the day after it occurred. I was just so terrified of losing my license, my employment, everything. But yes, whatever you require, I'll utter it under oath. I gazed at her for an extended moment. This woman had assisted my husband attempt to destroy me. She'd accepted $30,000 to engage in fraud. By any measure, she was complicit. But Grant had manipulated her the identical way he'd manipulated me. He'd discovered her vulnerability and exploited it. He was the planner. She was merely an instrument. "Don't be frightened anymore," I informed her. "You're not the villain in this narrative. He is the embryologist." Once he learned Emily was cooperating and had preserved records, developed an abrupt and expedient conscience. He provided his own statement to Patricia. He was frantic of losing his medical license and going to prison. He'd utter whatever we needed to incarcerate Grant. The most challenging call I made was to my mother. 2 years of near silence. 2 years of selecting Grant over her. I'd protected him when she questioned his intentions. I'd ceased inviting her to holidays. I'd labeled her envious, paranoid, incapable of accepting that I was content, and she'd been correct about everything. The telephone rang twice before she answered. Daphne. Her voice was cautious, optimistic, like she'd been anticipating this call for 2 years, but didn't wish to jinx it. "Mother?" My voice fractured on the word. "You were correct about everything about him, and I'm deeply sorry. I'm deeply, deeply sorry." There was a pause. I braced myself for the "I warned you" she'd earned, for the anger, the bitterness, the hurt I'd caused by selecting a con artist over the woman who raised me. Instead, she uttered, "What do you need, sweetheart?" She didn't gloat. She didn't remind me of every warning I'd disregarded. She didn't indicate that she'd attempted to inform me for years. She simply inquired how she could assist. That shattered me more than anything else. My mother is a retired attorney, specialized in estate law for 30 years before she withdrew. Within 48 hours, She'd connected me with the premier divorce lawyer in Connecticut and a criminal prosecutor specialized in fraud cases. My mom instructed me something that day. The individuals who genuinely love you don't require to be correct. They simply require you to be all right. I'd spent 2 years selecting a con artist over the woman who raised me, and her initial impulse when I telephoned crying was still to shield me. That's what genuine love appears like. Grant never comprehended that because he'd never experienced it. My lawyer was a woman named Patricia Kowalski, 5'2", silver hair, reading spectacles continuously balanced on her nose. She resembled someone's affectionate grandmother. She was a shark in a cardigan. Patricia reviewed everything: the clinic documents, Emily's statement, the findings, the affair evidence, the embezzlement records. When she finished, she looked up at me over those reading spectacles and smiled. Your husband is confronting fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement charges. The prenuptial infidelity clause operates in your favor now because he's the one who's been unfaithful in his little scheme to falsify medical records after the birth. That's a felony he was planning to commit. We have evidence of intent. She coordinated with the prosecutor. Emily gave a formal sworn statement to police. The embryologist cooperated in exchange for diminished charges. Grant's firm was quietly notified about the missing funds. They commenced their own investigation and immediately froze his access to client accounts. A judge reviewed the evidence, discovered probable cause, issued an arrest warrant for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. My lawyer termed it a formality at this point. I termed it the finest piece of paper I'd ever observed in my life. 8 1/2 by 11 in of pure justice. 6 weeks after that ultrasound appointment, I proposed to Grant that we host a celebration, a baby moon party at my grandmother's estate. Both families, close friends, an afternoon garden assembly to celebrate the infant arriving soon. His eyes illuminated like Christmas morning. Additional witnesses to his devoted husband performance. Additional individuals who would feel sympathy for him later when his wife was exposed as unfaithful. Additional fuel for the compassion he was planning to exploit. That's a wonderful concept, he said, kissing my forehead in that tender way that used to make me feel protected. Allow me to assist, plan everything. No. I patted his chest. You've been laboring so intensely lately. All those late nights. At the workplace, permit me to manage the party. You simply appear and relish it. He had no notion that my version of managing everything included police officers waiting in the guest house, my lawyer positioned near the bar, Marcus Webb prepared to testify, every piece of evidence arranged in folders, and his own parents about to discover exactly who their son genuinely was. The party was scheduled for Saturday. Grant spent that morning in the bathroom practicing expressions in the mirror, adjusting his tie, rehearsing his enthusiastic father smile. I observed him through the gap in the door. This man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years. This man I'd trusted with my future, my family, my heart. He believed he was walking into his crowning accomplishment. He had no notion he was walking into his own burial, the Holloway family estate in late spring. My grandmother's gardens in complete bloom. 50 years of meticulous cultivation bursting with color, white tents on the rear lawn, champagne chilling in silver containers, flowers arranged on every table, a string quartet performing softly near the rose bushes, 50 guests milling about in their Sunday finest, family, friends, colleagues, Grant's parents had driven up from Maryland, so proud of their successful son and his lovely pregnant wife. My grandmother would have adored this party. She also would have perceived through Grant in about 30 seconds flat. But that's grandmother insight for you. The older generation possesses a sensor for frauds that the remainder of us have to cultivate the difficult way. Grant was in his absolute element, working the crowd like a politician at a fundraiser. Handshakes, backslaps, that charming laugh he'd refined over years of practice. His hand kept discovering my belly for photos. Every time someone named a camera, there he was, the devoted father-to-be, gazing at me with what looked like devotion. He was so adept at pretending to be human. I nearly felt pity for him. Nearly. The sensation lasted approximately 3 seconds before I recalled the $50,000 he'd spent trying to destroy my existence. Sympathy dissipated pretty swiftly after that. Grant's mother kept dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. I always knew he'd make a wonderful father, she informed anyone who would listen. Such a fine boy, such a caring husband. His father walked around shaking hands, chest expanded, proud of the family Grant was supposedly constructing, the legacy continuing, the Donovan name carried forward. My own mother stood near the dessert table, observing Grant with the patient expression of a cat, observing a mouse that doesn't recognize it's captured. She caught my eye across the lawn and raised her champagne glass slightly. Nearly time, around 3 o'clock. Grant performed exactly what I knew he would do. He'd been dropping hints for weeks about desiring to commemorate fatherhood with a DNA test, frame the results in the nursery, evidence of their connection. So romantic, so meaningful, so completely staged. At the party, he brought it up again, loudly, ensuring plenty of people could hear. You know what we ought to do, darling. He drew me close, arm around my waist, performing to the crowd. I've been reflecting. Let's obtain one of those DNA test kits. We can frame the results for the nursery. Evidence that daddy and baby are connected eternally. Wouldn't that be special? Several guests made awe sounds. His mother dabbed her eyes again. I pretended to hesitate. Oh, I don't know. That seems like considerable trouble. Come on, it'll be amazing. We could even reveal the results right here, right now. Make it part of the celebration. What do you think, everyone? Encouraging murmurs from the crowd. Someone said, "How sweet." Someone else mentioned they wished their husband was that thoughtful. Well, I looked around performing the shy wife. If everyone believes it's a good concept, Grant was practically radiating. This was his moment. The trap he'd spent over a year constructing was about to close shut. He could already taste my funds, my humiliation, my destruction. He simply didn't realize whose neck was in the trap. If this narrative has you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. I adore hearing your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's proceed to what you've been anticipating. Instead of extracting a DNA kit, I walked toward the small platform we'd established near the fountain, the one intended for toasts and speeches. I picked up the microphone. Grant smiled up at me from the crowd, champagne in hand. He was already rehearsing his shocked, devastated expression, practicing the tears he'd cry when the truth emerged about his unfaithful wife. "Thank you all for attending today," I said, my voice carrying across the lawn. This party is supposed to be about celebration, about family, about truth. I discovered Grant's eyes in the crowd. My husband stated he wanted to disclose something special today, so I'm going to assist him perform exactly that. His smile flickered just for a second, the initial crack in his performance. I reached under the podium and extracted a folder. 3 months ago, I discovered something about my husband that transformed everything I believed I understood about my marriage. I desire to share it with all of you today because Grant is correct. This ought to be about truth. Grant's smile was frozen now. His champagne glass had halted halfway to his lips. Grant and I struggled with fertility. His diagnosis meant natural conception was impossible for us. So we underwent IVF at a clinic he selected. One held up the initial document. These are the records from that clinic. The original records before anyone had an opportunity to modify them. I permitted that word to linger in the air. Original. Grant's face went pale. These records demonstrate that my husband bribed 2 clinic employees to exchange his sperm sample with donor sperm. He compensated $30,000 to a nurse. He compensated the embryologist, and he compensated $15,000 to a young man named Marcus Webb. I gestured toward the edge of the crowd. Marcus stepped forward, a 28-year-old grad student who'd believed he was assisting an infertile couple, not engaging in fraud, to provide the sperm that was utilized to conceive my child without my knowledge, without my consent. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Grant's mother seized his father's arm. Someone dropped a champagne glass and it shattered on the patio stones. My husband's plan was straightforward. I continued, wait until our child was delivered, demand a DNA test, and when the results established he wasn't the biological father, which he already knew would happen, he would accuse me of having an affair. I held up more documents. Our prenuptial has an infidelity provision. If I had supposedly cheated, I would owe him $500,000. He could pursue additional damages. He could ruin my reputation. He could take everything my grandmother left me and depart. Grant discovered his voice. It emerged, stringled, desperate. Daphne, darling, this is insane. You're bewildered. It's the pregnancy, the hormones. You're not reasoning clearly. I'm not finished. My voice was ice. The crowd fell silent. In addition to bribing the fertility clinic, my husband embezzled approximately $50,000 from his clients at his firm to finance this scheme. I looked at a man standing near the bar, Grant's supervisor, who'd been quietly invited. His firm is now aware and investigating. Grant's supervisor set down his drink. His expression conveyed everything. My husband also has $180,000 in gambling obligations, funds he owes to people who don't accept late payments kindly. And for the past 8 months, I extracted the photographs. Nothing explicit, just romantic enough to leave no uncertainty. He's been having an affair with his assistant. Grant's mother produced a sound like she'd been struck in the stomach. I displayed the photos, restaurant dinners, hotel entrances, the kind of evidence that eliminates all possibility of denial. This wasn't even his initial attempt, I added. 5 years ago in Boston, he targeted another woman with family wealth. That relationship ended when she discovered financial irregularities. She's provided a statement to investigators and is prepared to testify. Grant's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It struck the stone patio and burst champagne spraying across his costly shoes. Those are falsehoods, he stammered. She's fabricating this. She's mentally unstable. The pregnancy has influenced her mind. Grant, his own mother's voice pierced through the noise. Quiet, but sharp enough to wound. Is any of this true? He turned to confront her, opened his mouth to deny everything. Nothing emerged. Emily Brennan stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the guest house, pale but determined. "I'm the nurse he bribed," she said. "I have documentation of everything. I've already provided my statement to police." Marcus Webb spoke up next. "He compensated me $15,000 and informed me it was a private arrangement. I had no notion I was part of a fraud until Mrs. Holloway's investigator contacted me last month." Grant looked around wildly at the faces of people who'd been laughing with him 10 minutes ago. His colleagues, his family, the society, friends he'd labored so intensely to impress. Everyone was staring at him like he was something decaying they just discovered on their footwear. Then 2 police officers stepped out from the guest house, walking calmly across the lawn. Grant Donovan. The first officer's voice was professionally neutral. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. You have the entitlement to remain silent. Anything you utter can and will be employed against you in a court of law." They handcuffed him directly there in front of everyone. His mother was sobbing now. His father declined to look at him, staring at the ground like he wished it would open up and consume him. As they walked him toward the police car, Grant attempted one final time, one final manipulation. "Daphne, please." His voice fractured. "We can resolve this. I committed errors, but I love you. I've always loved you. Don't do this. Consider our infant. Consider our family." I looked at him, genuinely looked at the man I'd shared my life with for 3 years, the man I'd defriended to my own mother, the man who'd stood at an altar and vowed to love and protect me while calculating how much he could steal. "You're absolutely correct, Grant," I said. "We just resolved it." They placed him in the back of the police car. I observed it drive away down the long gravel path past the gardens my grandmother had planted half a century ago through the iron gates of the property Grant had desired so desperately to possess. 50 guests stood in absolute silence. Then my mother walked up and placed her arm around my shoulders. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "Your grandmother would be too." And for the first time in months, I took a complete breath. Grant was denied bail. "Flight risk," the judge stated. Between his gambling obligations and the individuals he owed funds to, there was excessive chance he'd vanish. Those gambling creditors became extremely interested very swiftly once the arrests made the news. They'd been patient while Grant had a wealthy wife. That patience evaporated the moment they understood the money train had derailed his affair partner, the assistant he'd been sneaking around with for 8 months. Resigned from his firm the morning after the party, didn't even clean out her desk, simply sent an email and vanished. She didn't wait for the handcuffs to click shut before she fled. I've observed rats abandon sinking ships with more loyalty. At least rats have the decency to glance back once. Grant's firm completed their internal investigation within 2 weeks. $53,000 confirmed missing. They filed their own criminal charges. The woman from Boston, Caroline Ashford, came forward publicly once she heard about the arrest. She'd spent 5 years feeling foolish for falling for his act, too humiliated to pursue justice. She wasn't humiliated anymore. Her statement added another dimension to the case prosecutors were constructing. The divorce was finalized in record time. Grant's lawyer attempted to negotiate, but there was nothing to negotiate with. The prenuptials, infidelity provision, the one Grant had been planning to weaponize against me, operated in my favor. Now, he was the one who'd been unfaithful for 8 months. He owed me, not the other direction. Not that he possessed anything to provide. Every asset he claimed to own was either borrowed, stolen, or imaginary. The criminal case progressed swiftly. Emily Brennan testified. The embryologist cooperated fully in exchange for a diminished sentence. Marcus Webb provided his statement. The paper trail Grant believed he'd concealed wasn't concealed at all. Fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, each charge adhered. Each charge carried years. His parents ceased attending court after the first week. His father issued a statement saying Grant had made selections that no parent can defend. His mother checked into a facility for exhaustion, which is what wealthy individuals term it when they can't confront reality. Grant Donovan, who had walked into my life 4 years ago with such meticulous charm, would spend the subsequent several years in prison. When he eventually emerged, he'd have nothing. No funds, no career, no family willing to acknowledge him. No future targets who wouldn't discover his criminal record with a straightforward search of his designation. The trap he'd constructed so patiently and so carefully had snapped shut on his own neck. My infant was delivered 4 months after the party, healthy, perfect, absolutely innocent in everything that had transpired. Some individuals inquired if I was going to contact Marcus Webb, include him somehow. I contemplated it. But Marcus was a 28-year-old grad student who'd made an unwise decision for funds he desperately required. He wasn't prepared to be a father. He didn't desire to be, and I didn't require him to be. My child would have my mother finally back in my life where she belonged, would have the entire Holloway family, the legacy my grandmother constructed over decades of love and labor. That was more than adequate. That was everything. I acquired knowledge through all of this. Family isn't about DNA. It's not about blood tests or biology or genetic matches on a chart. Family is about who appears, who remains, who selects you every single day, even when it's challenging. Especially when it's challenging. My mother selected me when I didn't merit it. I selected my infant when the circumstances were complicated. That's what family actually signifies. My mother and I had lunch every week now, compensating for 2 lost years, 1 conversation at a time. She never uttered, "I warned you." Not once. Finally, I questioned her why. She set down her coffee cup and smiled. Because observing you dismantled that man was more satisfying than any 4 words could ever be. I laughed. First genuine laugh in what felt like forever. 3 weeks after the party, early morning, I sat in my grandmother's kitchen. My kitchen now in the residence Grant had coveted so desperately. Sunlight poured through windows that had observed for generations of Holloway women lived their lives. The identical windows my grandmother had looked through while consuming her morning tea 50 years ago. I prepared myself a cup of chamomile, her recipe, her preferred brand. Some customs are worth preserving. My phone buzzed on the counter. Text from my mother. Lunch tomorrow. I smiled and typed back always. Outside, the gardens were in complete bloom. The roses my grandmother planted when she was a youthful bride, the hydrangeas she added when my mother was delivered, the lavender border I'd assisted her installed when I was 10 years old. My small hands patting dirt around each seedling while she recounted stories about our family. I placed my hand on my belly, experienced the infant move. Grant Donovan had attempted to take everything from me, my funds, my reputation, my future, my tranquility. All he actually accomplished was demonstrate to me exactly how resilient I'd always been. Some individuals spend their entire lives waiting for justice to arrive. I was fortunate. I got to deliver mine personally with documentation in front of 50 witnesses. My grandmother used to utter that Holloway women don't fracture. We flex, we adjust, we survive. And when someone attempts to incinerate us down, we ascend from the ashes and construct something superior. Grant believed he wedded an easy prey. He wedded a Holloway, and now he possessed ample time in a prison cell to contemplate that error. Thank you immensely for viewing. More of my most gripping narratives are already on your display. Click one now and don't overlook the finest portion. You will adore it. Observe you in the subsequent